Boris, you're the only politician that knows anything about cars, roads, fuel, trucks, vans. You've been a journalist who's written about cars. And at FairFuelUK, we want to know what you think you can do if we leave the EU to improve the lives of drivers in the UK.
The most important point is that fuel at the moment in the UK is wildly overpriced by comparison with virtually every other European country. That is because, as everybody knows, there's two components of the government's extra costs. There's excise duty, but then on top of that, there is VAT, which is levied on the value of the combined fuel and the excise. Now, there have been proposals to cut the VAT from 20% to, say, 17%, to give the motorist a break.
Yeah.
The scandal is that you can't even do that because of EU rules.
It's against the EU law.
It's against EU law. So the weird thing is that, of course, around Europe, most countries in Europe have lower fuel prices than us. Luxembourg has a lower VAT rate than us, as well as a much lower excise rate than us. But we can't bring our VAT rates in line with Luxembourg, even if we want to. Now, that is outrageous. We are basically being prevented by this supranational government from doing something that might well be useful for the economy, good for UK motorists, stimulate jobs, stimulate growth, and all the arguments that Fair Fuel makes.
We proved that it will stimulate economic activity in the UK, and you just reduced that duty element by even 3.5%, and it would send literally billions back into the economy. So you'd be for doing that. What about the 18 billion we pay every year into the EU? Could we not put some of that back into roads, into reliable journeys, into cleaner air?
Well, that's another very important component of the problem. We're sending £20 billion a year gross to the EU. We would get back immediately £10 billion that we could indeed spend on our priorities. The National Health Service, yes, of course, you could look at the state of our roads in the UK. Potholes all over the place, many of them, by the way, caused by 44-ton European lorries, which I remember, because I was there in Luxembourg in the Transport Council when we were outvoted, as far as I can remember. I have to check the details, but I remember this thing coming through against huge protests from lots of people in this country who thought that 44-ton lorries with several axles was going to be too much for going through country lanes. I'm hazy on the details now, but it was a long time ago. But I remember when this started, and it was rammed through in a way that the UK didn't want.
And those foreign lorry drivers cause over 3,000 accidents every year on our roads, which means motorways have to be closed. And we are trying to charge them a token levy of £10. This was the Secretary of State for Transport. £10 for foreign lorries to use the UK roads, and the EU say this is unlawful and they will fine us if we carry on with this.
But this whole thing is absolutely bonkers, Quentin. Let just give you one example. You talk about foreign lorries on our roads and our ability to set standards here in the UK, and to London, which I used to run as mayor until quite recently, we wanted to make the lorries safer on our streets, to stop them crushing cyclists, for the good of the drivers of those vehicles as much as anything else. Poor guys, can you imagine the mental anguish that they feel when, because of the construction of their cabs, they cannot have adequate visibility in a very, very crowded city, they can't see the vulnerable road users, and they hit a cyclist. Their life is ruined. A driver, and very often through very little fault of their own. Now, how fantastic it would be if you could say to the truck industry, if you want to have a lorry going through London, the cab has got to be, conform to certain types, and you can see them now, bus-type cabs for drivers, much lower down, fantastic windows, great visibility. It would solve a huge amount of problems. Couldn't do it. Brussels says no. Got to wait until it's agreed that the Transport Council, because why? Because I'm told that certain companies in the EU, certain non-British companies, weren't ready with their technology, weren't ready with their products. They got onto their governments, the French, to speak of nation entirely at random, and they blocked it.
Meanwhile, people are dying.
Well, actually, thank God, touch wood, it's been a massive fall. But we've had to put in a lot of very expensive cycle lanes, which are not universally popular with motorists.
Don't get me started.
So I think we better be careful about that one. But we've had to do that
to protect them,
to protect cyclists, and partly because
these EU
you can't go for the some of the more sensible things you could do with lorry cabs. But I think for motorists and because I think fuel is going to start going up again. I think the price of oil is going to start going up again. And it's what, $50 a barrel now, is it?
Yeah,
it seems to be back up there. Well, how absolutely monstrous it is that if we wanted to protect our motorists a bit, give them a bit of the comfort that motorists in Holland, in Greece, all sorts of Luxembourg,
France.
Yeah, I remember driving around the continent and filling up for much less. You still can. You still can.
The most expensive
we do it the whole time
in the EU, and Brussels doesn't do anything to help us give parity with the rest of the EU. Why not? We're supposed to be in.
Well, that's such a good point. I mean, isn't that an amazing paradox? That we're trying to build this sort of common European entity.
With
actually,
standards.
what they won't let us do is come in line with European standards. So it's monstrous. It's anti-democratic. British government, British politicians should be able to set fuel duty and VAT in line with what they think is what they think is the needs of the UK motorist and the UK economy. And I think your arguments about the economic benefits of making that cut are very plausible.
When you talk about interference from big business in Europe on these regulations and these standards, we look at the emissions scandal with Volkswagen, and we know that the big car companies over in Germany really lobbied.
No, that was I watched your recent video on YouTube about this, and I thought it's absolutely true. And I remember seeing it happen because everybody got obsessed with CO2, and so everybody said, we've got to reduce CO2 emissions, global warming, blah blah blah. So diesel became the great hope there, but of course everybody conspired in the cover-up about the PM10s, the PM2.5s, the particulate matter that was coming out of the back of these things, and the NOx. And there's been a huge increase in pollution. And then you have to ask yourself whether the EU, the Commission, whoever's responsible, has been colluding with the basic gaming of the system. They must have known.
Because the Germans and Merkel will have said, don't mess with this because it's going to affect our factories, it's going to affect our productivity, our German cars.
You've got to wonder about what happened there.
The biggest worry.
Have you got any evidence about that? Because I've never actually seen
well,
it.
It's all documented that they constantly try to water the proposals down and get it lower and lower and lower.
Get what lower and lower?
Well, the amount that they were supposed to be emitting, they wanted this.
Oh, the EU. Yeah. What the CO2 they wanted lower and lower. Yeah.
The big problem here, though, is now we have this problem, this apocalyptic diesel nightmare in our air, and you can taste it if you walk along the streets in London. The EU are now responsible for sorting that out. Now, we've got to do this ourselves, otherwise they'll muck it up again.
I completely agree. And what it shows is the disaster of taking these decisions at a European level. Because it was the big companies, VW and others, who were able to go to the Commission, to get the inside track, to make their pitch, to agree all, they
paid for lobbyists.
They do the homologation. They do the type approvals. They decide, whether they're going to look at the testing from the track or on the road.
It was their testing regime which was faulted, not ours. It was an EU testing regime.
Absolutely right. And you can't. If here's the thing that really enrages me. If it had been a UK government that had been responsible, we could at least have kicked the bastard. We at least have got the guy, the woman, whoever it was, who'd been responsible for covering up the emission standards scandal, because somebody must have known what was really going on. Everybody knows that cycles are different on the track and on the road. Somebody must have known what was going on. There's no democratic accountability. Out there in this city, nobody has the faintest idea who the Transport Commissioner is. I mean, you probably do.
No.
Do you know the Transport?
I don't.
Well, no, even you.
Any 28 elected.
You're about the most knowledgeable motoring writer in this country. You don't know who the EU Transport Commissioner is. I don't know. I've got a faintest idea. How can we hold these people to account? It's a scandal.
They're unelected.
They are unelected.
Do you know who the other 28?
I couldn't. No, well, I know there's Juncker who runs it, and then there's a few. I mean, God, just faintest idea. I mean, I couldn't identify. I don't know for the man in the moon.
Yeah, these people control our lives and will control the quality of our air, and that's the point I want to make here. That we should have the control of our environment and the quality of our air in our towns, and not the EU. Otherwise, they'll be having random checks and approach it with their usual lumpen-handed zeal.
Yes, and who's to know? Because there's a famous the reason for having democracy and for keeping decisions as low as near the people as you can is because you then minimise the disaster when somebody gets something wrong.
Yeah.
And that's basically the argument for what we want to see. We want to see power handed back to nations, back to regions. If you centralise it all in the way that we're doing at the moment, more and more power is being transferred to Brussels. The scope for the cataclysmic cock-up gets bigger and bigger. And that's all you need to know about what's gone wrong with the single currency.
Yeah.
They decided that they were going to have this one-size-fits-all regime. It's gone wrong. Nobody's responsible. Nobody can put it back together again. The only solution they've got at the moment is to take away more power from the nation states. And you had in the last 5 years, you've had 2 European governments deposed by the Commission.
Yeah. Greece
and Italy. Bureaucrats installed. I mean, it's frightening. It's actually frightening.
And it is unelected. There is no democracy. And when they had to do the Greek bailout, this was against all the EU laws. They weren't allowed to bail out. Merkel said we can't do that. Then suddenly they changed the laws to suit themselves.
And what people, I think, don't understand, and we've got to get the message over in the next 35 days, or how long we've got left now, but this is going to get worse. We, at the recent renegotiation, totally gave up our right to veto any further moves to prop up the euro.
Yeah.
So that's going to mean more budgetary implications, more money, like we had to bail out the Greeks, more money going across. It means more harmonisation of tax rates, of company law, of property rights,
pension liabilities,
all that sort of thing.
50% of the EU budget is spent on welfare. Look at Italy, look at France. That's the future. That's the uncertainty.
Well, I mean, and look at the Italian banking system. It's about to implode. It's got a black hole of about 360 billion euros. Well, at the moment, what they're doing is they're just keeping the lid on the volcano until June the 23rd.
Yeah.
They are desperate. They're desperate to stop any fluttering in the dovecotes. They want the whole thing steady as she goes. I do think it will be I think it's a democratic disaster already. It's an economic disaster if you look at what's happened to unemployment in the Mediterranean countries. 50% youth unemployment. A generation sacrificed on the altar of an ideology.
An ideology and a federation and egos for a superstate.
Yeah, I think it's a sort of they got locked into a mistake and they find it very difficult to get out. And the only way to help them is to vote leave on June the 23rd, make a big change in our country, and I think common sense in Europe as well.
So for the 37 million drivers, 1.2 million of them will be Fair Fuel supporters and will be watching this. Would you say that their lives on the roads could be made better if we left the EU?
Absolutely. I would emphatically argue that leave is the best option for the UK motorist. It will give our government the freedom to help motorists with fuel prices when they go up too high by cutting VAT in a way that we're prevented from doing at the moment. It would mean that we could decide standards of vehicles and emission standards in a way that you don't have millions of people, literally millions of people, stampeded into buying the wrong sort of vehicle.
50% of the UK converted to diesel on that advice.
With disastrous consequences. And it would mean that we'd have large sums of money, probably about £10 billion a year net back to this country, that you could spend on priorities such as the NHS or fixing the roads or whatever it happened to be. So it's a win. And we'd be the heroes of Europe. We'd be leading the way in restoring democracy to Europe.
And to those environmentalists who might be watching, to say that we have to curtail car use and we have to go on public transport, how realistic is that?
Well, I'm a massive believer in public transport and mass transit, and in this city, let's be honest, there's been a reduction in driving in the centre of the city, a reduction in the fewer people own cars now than used to. That's great. But there are plenty of areas where
talk to the people in Sussex,
come on,
Northampton, Warwickshire.
Let's be honest. Look at Suffolk, Norfolk. Look at how on earth, if you want to run a serious business anywhere outside the city, if you want to move your goods around efficiently, you're going to need motor vehicles of one kind or other. And
a strategic road network that works.
And of course, it's in all our interests, and a fantastic road network. And one thing that I want to do, and I would urge one thing that I've got TfL to do that I think would be of interest to our viewers is I totally changed the attitude of TfL towards roads. So one thing we are going to do is to build more capacity. Now, how can you build more capacity in a great city like London? Tunnels. Only way forward. We're going to do TfL got plans for 2 giant tunnels, east-west on both north and south of the river, and together they would probably take 15% of London's traffic
away.
Yeah,
and really reduce.
And fantastic, because so many people, you think of road haulage, whatever, they're going to want to go through a tunnel. Now, people say, "Oh my God, the fumes, the pollution, or the congestion." No, we're moving to a new age, Quentin. We're going to have driverless vehicles. Yeah. We're going to have much more low carbon vehicles. We're going to have electric vehicles. All that's fantastic, and we're going to go in that direction.
We're still going to need the space.
We're going to need the space, and people, in the end, the motor car, the motor vehicle, was the single biggest force for liberation and democracy in the 20th century. And social cohesion. It gave people a power and an autonomy and an independence they had never had before.
And opened up new horizons.
Of course it did. And that is, but we are going to continue with that, but we're going to do it obviously in a very environmentally friendly way.
And let's talk about that, because you and I in the past have done electric car things together, and you are passionate about electric cars, as I am.
And you are a believer, and you're right.
Every day.
You're right. And do you drive a Tesla?
No, I drive a little Citroen C0.
Oh, right. Should have been. No, they got their headquarters in Uxbridge, which is my constituency.
It's great. And we need to, first of all, to start.
I can't afford a Tesla either, just the avoidance of that. I wouldn't get anywhere near it.
We need to really kickstart the EV industry in the UK and make it the epicenter.
I thought actually that was one of the great things in the Queen's speech today or yesterday. Fantastic. We should be the EV capital of the world.
But I want you to tell me that you would support this and really help push for EU.
EVs.
EV rather. Push for EV.
EV, not EU.
No, absolutely.
let's join let's join the EV and get out of the EV.
To healthcare quality and to cut fuel costs.
Yeah, definitely.
It works.
Of course. And well, one of the things we did in the last few years was accelerate the drive towards an EV taxi, which has been difficult.
Very.
I got on the streets of London. I'm going to stop talking as I'm there. On the streets of London, the first ever electric double-decker bus. They said it couldn't be done, it just has been done, and we're going to go forward with more and more of them.
And you need to help those taxi guys, because they can't be expected to spend 50 grand on electric cabs without the charging infrastructure.
No, but you put the money into the charging infrastructure and into supporting them to buy the vehicles.
Good.
And there's a big fund for that.
And here's a final question: if you were to be elevated to a higher political office in not too distant future, would you support road users in the UK? Would
totally.
You be?
I'm a believer. I'm a believer in supporting as TfL used to say, every journey matters. And it does. Quite seriously, we've had a long period now where I think motorists have had a raw deal. I think fuel prices have been allowed to get out of control, and it is infamous that the UK government, by the law of Brussels, cannot lower our own fuel prices to bring them in line with other European countries. I mean, that is crazy.
But you would support more reliable journeys, cleaner air, and help us get to schools, to shops, to businesses.
Absolutely. A healthier
car, however it's powered,
a healthier,
and be
cleaner.
a politician that understands about that social mobility, how important it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. It's the story of the 20th century, and you can track the spread of the automobile and the growth of democracy in the 20th century. It was a personal liberation and also female emancipation. Once it became clear that, female drivers could run over their husbands and all the rest of it, there was no way you were going to stop it. So I truly believe that the motor car has played a great part in lifting our lives and will continue to do so, and I will support it. We've just got to make them cleaner and greener. And the scandal is that it was Brussels that sent us off in the wrong direction for so long.
Yeah. Road haulage industry, 98% of everything we buy in the shops travels by road on those wagons, some of them foreign wagons, admittedly. Do you think leaving the EU will help the haulage industry?
I think it will. I've talked to hauliers in the UK. There's a wonderful company called Europa, actually, where we launched our campaign, and they were telling me about crazy European rules that mean their truck height it has to be a certain maximum, which is totally unnecessary for roads in this country. Obviously, if you're a driver and you've got a load of a certain height, you don't go under a low bridge.
Well, you can't. It restricts where you can go.
So the pointless regulations of that kind, they would be able to get round, and they were fervently for leave. They believed that our trade would go up, that British business would be less encumbered by regulation, and you'd have a flow of ever cleaner, greener trucks across the channel, and that's what we want to see.
And all those foreign lorry drivers that come over here, they do take business away from the haulage industry. They do wear out our roads. They do contribute to pollution, and they don't buy the fuel here, and they don't even pay us the duty.
They don't.
So that's not fair, is it? I'm sorry, it's an old-fashioned view.
It's not fair, and I often thought when I was mayor, I thought of putting a special tax on foreign lorries coming into London, because I think it's crazy.
It is crazy.
Now, in the future, if we left on June the 23rd, a mayor could say, right, who do I want to see, rumbling through the streets at peak traffic hour with a, colossal articulated lorry? Do I want, blocking the streets, getting lost, jackknifing on a yellow box junction? I don't want...
No, nobody does.
These international drivers, I'm going to put an extra charge on them. Yeah. You could do that. Yeah. Now, you can't do that at the moment because it would be held to be discriminatory. And the same point can be made about the cabs. That was what I wanted to do, to have a safer cab zone whereby London could say, we are not going to let you come into this part of the UK unless you've got the right cab. We couldn't do that.
What about White Van Man? He is going to be increasingly the backbone of the economy. He's going to be doing all these online deliveries. What could help him if we leave the EU?
I think, again, you're really looking at a reduction in the burden of his costs, of the kind of regulations that he faces. But I think principally fuel would be the biggest thing. I would think. And many white, the classic example, White Van Man. You see, 95% of UK businesses do nothing exporting to the EU.
No. But 100% of those provide jobs.
Yes, but 100% have to comply with every jot and tittle of EU regulation, and that's the burden they face. So you lift that off.